Hello and welcome to this video in which I'm going to discuss the decoy effect, or how we sometimes redefine the center, or what center is. So I'm going to start with a question. Do you know what expensive is, or what does expensive even mean? Of course, you're going to have a definition for what expensive is, but do you really know when something is expensive or something should be a little bit cheaper than it is? And I'm going to start with some sort of experiment. Imagine that you want to buy a watch. You have gone through many hours and hours of researching through all the websites of your favorite watches. You have asked many people, friends, families, and they have given you their opinions about it. And then you have come with different models that I think that you think that they are appropriate for you, that you kind of like. You are liking the brands, you like their styles, and decided to go to a store. When you're off to the store, or at the store, you realize that there are two watches that you like equally, and you inquire about them. And the salesperson says, well, this watch costs $500 and it has A, B, and C features. It's very great. It looks very nice on you. And he says, well, and these are the one that you pointed out. It costs a little bit more. It actually costs the double. It costs $1,000. But it contains these, or it comes with all these other features. So you started to ponder, you started to think about, do I need all of these? Well, it turns out that maybe I just need a nice watch. I would like to have a watch. I like the idea of wearing a watch. I don't know if I would necessarily want to spend $1,000 on a watch. So you made your decision. You decided to go with the $500 watch. However, before you even get to say it, you have made your decision. It's clear in your mind. The salesperson, oh, and by the way, I'm so sorry, I forgot that we just received this other watch, and it's from the same brand that you like. These two that you pointed out are from the same brand. This is a new model, and it comes from with these other multiple features that the other two don't contain, and the price tag is $1,500. Now you start to think, wait a second, maybe I was rushing a little bit. Maybe some of these features are a little bit more necessary. What if I actually want to get this heart monitor, calorie count, whatever the features are in my watch? Maybe those are things that I actually want. You started to ponder, and now you're starting to think that maybe $500 is too cheap for a watch. So you start to perceive yourself of, maybe I'm rushing into this. Maybe I'm actually not making a proper decision. And at the end, in comparison, you ended up going for the $1,000 watch. Why? Because for you, at this moment, it kind of sounds like a compromise between something being too cheap and something that comes with too many features, and having to justify why did you spend so much money. Again, you compare. But the beauty of this is that a couple of minutes ago, you were decided that you actually wanted to go with $500 and that you thought that that was more than enough to pay for a watch. But now you're kind of decided for the $1,000, and you kind of feel like that is a bargain. Unfortunately, this happens a lot, and a lot more than we like to give credit to. But it's something that we don't even think. It's unconscious. We obviously realize that after the facto, and definitely not before we make those decisions. And I'm going to tell you another experiment, because this type of experiment, or the decoy effect, has been researched many, many times. And in fact, when you Google the decoy effect, and you will find one experiment, one of the most popular, based on research done through the sizes of popcorn. So imagine this: you go to a theater, and you are ready to watch a movie, and you are craving for popcorns. And when you go to buy it, you're offered two different sizes. In this case, you have the small size, perfect for you, and maybe something for someone else. Like a little bit of the popcorn will be for someone else, because there's no way you're going to eat all of that. The size is perfect for one, and a little bit more for someone else. And that is a small size. Then you have another size that is the large size. This is 4 times the amount of popcorn that contains the small one. So basically, it's a huge bag of popcorn that there's no way you're going to eat. You have only come with 3 people. So you think, well, maybe it's not worth it. But even if I had the same amount of people, maybe some of these people will not even want popcorn. So you decide that between the $4 popcorn and the $8 popcorn, the $4 make more sense. It's not even something that you would really consider, since the size looks super, super, super huge. Now, the interesting thing happened when actually you are introduced a third option. In this case, when someone says, well, there's also a medium size and it comes with double the size and it's only $7. So now you start to wonder, wait a second. So when I have the small one is $4, this one that is double that size is $7. I would actually be, eating more for less, because it would be more than double of what I'm eating, and only for $3 more. But now you also are starting to compare the $7 with the $8, because the $7 contained double the size, but it was cheaper. But the $8 contains 4 times the amount. So now you're starting to wonder, well, maybe I'm gaining so much by just spending an extra dollar. It just kind of makes sense. It's actually silly that I don't purchase the $8, because with that $1 extra, I will get so much more for my bucks. And in fact, that is a problem. The problem is we tend to make these decisions without wondering if we even wanted this amount of popcorn in the first place. We just feel the sense of urgency to make a decision. That's one of the reasons why the decoy effect works so well. And the second is the sense of you're gaining something. You have the feeling that by spending that extra amount of money, you're definitely having a bigger deal than you had before. Now, confused, unfortunately, this is a very common response. It's not only about you, and if you doubt that you would be falling for that, unfortunately, the majority of people do fall for that. It doesn't have to be in this example in particular. We fall for the decoy effect in other circumstances. It doesn't have to be specifically about choosing a product. It might be by choosing a service that we don't even need and we haven't even considered before. But when compared with other services, we have the feeling that we're gaining so much more by spending that extra dollar or extra $2 in another package. After giving you some examples about the decoy effect, I think it's proper now to give you some definitions. And although marketers have known intuitively about the decoy effect for a very long time, and they have used this knowledge to market certain products and to make you purchase certain things, neuroscientists and psychologists have given fairly recently rational explanations as to why we fall for this decoy effect. But first, let's talk about, again, what the decoy effect means. And I'm going to start by defining what decoy is. I'm going to give you 3 different definitions. One, according to Merriam-Webster Dictionary, decoy is defined as one, in terms of hunting, is a pond into which wildfowl are lured for capture. That's the first one. The second one is that someone or something used to lead another into a trap, especially hunting. An artificial bird used to attract live birds within shot. And the third definition is someone or something used to draw attention away from another. So you can see, it's pretty clear that what they have in common is that it's basically something that is used to either a distraction or something that is used with the intention of capturing someone's attention, right? And that is a commonality that have all these possible definitions. Again, something that is used as a trap to capture someone or capture someone's attention. We can define the decoy effect as a bias for which a person doesn't evaluate options for the inherent value. That means that you don't look at it for what it is, but rather by the value that they represent within a group. That is a comparative value. The only value is established according to the relative value against other options that are given. In plain English, the value of something will depend on the relative value of such thing in comparison with the other options given. Now, what are the origins of this decoy effect? More than just the price. In this case, we're going to discuss that this is not necessarily only attached to pricing. In fact, I'm going to name the scientists who were behind discovering or doing the research on the decoy effect. Chris Puto, John Payne, and Joel Hoover conducted a study to evaluate people's choices given different options. Basically, what they did is that they gave a group of people different options in terms of restaurants. They could choose a star restaurant that was 5 minutes away and a 5-star restaurant that was 25 minutes away. In this case, they tried to evaluate people's choices in terms of convenience versus quality, meaning, yes, the 5-star is more desirable, is nicer, it's a nicer experience, but is way farther than the 3-star that you have. After that, the researchers added an extra option, that is a 4-star restaurant located 35 minutes away. Now, most people chose a 5-star restaurant that was 25 minutes away. Now, why? Because now, if you compare the second option that you have, the 5-star restaurant that was 25 minutes, and the 4-star that was 35 minutes. Now, the 3rd star kind of starts like looking like the cheap option, same as the first example that I gave you. It felt like, well, given the 3 options that you have, the 3-star, the 4-star, the 5-star, it seems like this, if I go with the 3rd star restaurant, I'm going to look bad, basically. However, the other 2 options are now competing, except that the 5-star seems such a better deal because now it's even closer than the 4-star, that the decision is actually way easier. Now, nothing had changed in terms of value or quality of service, meaning they have not said anything about anything else about the restaurant. They just were giving those 2 variables, meaning the time that will take them to get to a restaurant and the quality of the restaurant in terms of stars. The only thing changing was the introduction of a 3rd option that people could compare with. So in the first case, when they were given just 2 options, a lot of people actually chose the closest one, the 3-star restaurant that was within 5 minutes. When a 3rd option was included, now people started to perceive that as a cheap option, and they decided to go for the 5-star because in comparison, it looked like the better deal because it was closer or close enough, not as close as the 5 minutes, but closer than the one that was 35 minutes and only 4-star. Now, in the 3 examples that I have given you so far, remember the watch, the popcorn, and the restaurants, the options were different, and the reasons behind the choices are different as well. But they all have one thing in common. The choices are made based on the comparison with other options, not the real value of an object or service. So now, why do we do these? Why do we do this not decides or judgments? Why do we incur in that without thinking? Well, for that, I need to actually expand a little more about what the decoy effect is based on. So the decoy effect is based on 2 main concepts that we have when we studied biases. One is anchoring, and the other one is a contrast principle. So anchoring, you probably have heard me talking about that before. Anchoring is basically when we establish an anchor to a particular piece of information. So for example, if you go to a new city, you've never been into that city, but this city is quite more expensive than you are from, and then you go to a supermarket for the first time, and then you start comparing different prices, and you look in particular at bread. And now you look at the bread is $5 a loaf, the package. And for you, that is expensive because if you compare yourself with where you come from, and then the bread there is maybe like $2 only, that seems very, very expensive. However, since you are in a new situation, in a new city, and then you're starting to compare prices, now that is going to be your anchoring price. That means that for you, that's going to be a point of reference. Now, imagine that you continue to go in for the same aisle, and then you realize that there's a different brand, and that costs $7. Now, you're starting to wonder about the quality of the $5 one. A couple of minutes ago, you were looking at the piece of bread and you were thinking that that is too expensive, but now you're thinking something different. You're actually thinking that maybe the $5 is actually very cheap. Not cheap in terms of price, cheap in terms of quality. Now, if you see again that you started to wonder, that is because the first option you saw establish an anchoring point in which you will base everything else on. In this case, everything else within that category. In this case, talking about price, and more particular, talking about price of bread. This anchoring is also attached to the idea of, well, in this case, not to the idea, this anchoring is attached to our experience, meaning we cannot separate what we already know. We cannot separate the things that we have experienced in our entire life, obviously, which means that we will rely on what we consider fair or not fair based on our prior experiences to make our current choices. Anchoring is also related to availability. And I don't know if you remember, I kind of introduced that in the first couple of videos in which I was talking about availability in terms of what is accessible to your brain immediately. If you think about a piece of bread and the cost, your point of reference is whatever you have experienced in the past. Going to a different supermarket, maybe in your city, maybe going to a different city that was expensive, more expensive than your city that you are coming from, but not as expensive as this one. So that is a different point of reference. But now you establish that as a point of reference to compare with the current situation. Now, that is available to you, meaning that information is available to you, and then you get to compare with your prior experience. Now, if we have a prior experience buying at a particular supermarket and we see an increase in prices, that is a different example. The first thing that comes to mind is how much those things used to cost in that supermarket. So again, if this is not the first time that you come to this supermarket, you have been coming to a supermarket for many, many years, and all of a sudden you see a bump into the prices. The first thing again that comes to mind is how much things or those things that you're buying used to cost. If, however, with the first example, we go to a new city, as I was saying before, and we don't have anything to compare with, there's nothing, there's no point of reference. You're establishing your point of reference now. The only information available to us is information that we have from where we come from, but we still don't know how much things cost in that city. Therefore, we cannot establish what is fair or what is not. Related to that, meaning to the anchoring, again, the anchoring process is the contrast principle. From prior videos, again, as the basis for any bias, I always talk about the idea of survival as a key for many of our biases. Space of survival depends on our understanding of our surroundings. So again, if we don't understand our environment, it's going to be very, very, very difficult for us to survive. And it's also very difficult for us to thrive. And it's very difficult for us to live comfortably. That's why we look for things that are familiar to us, things that we understand, or things that we think that we understand. For that reason, we establish connections between things that we don't know yet and things that we do understand or we know. Our sense of fairness or unfairness and even value will be determined by what we already know. We compare things based on what we already know, and we will establish a contrast between the things being compared, which means that if I have no point of reference whatsoever, and then I'm exposed for the first time to these new prices, I immediately have to create an anchor. I really have to find out what seems fair. So now I'm starting to look at prices, for example, of bread, and I see $5, $7, $9, $6. So obviously now with the new pricing that I'm seeing in this supermarket, the $5 seems to be the cheaper option. However, you're starting to wonder if that is a good thing for you. Maybe that is just too cheap of a product. You wanted to spend a little bit more money. Now, the second thing that you do is once you establish an anchor, you start to compare, and that is related to the second thing that I was saying, between all of these pieces of bread. maybe the $7 or $8 seems a little bit outrageous, but in comparison with the 5 and 6, maybe the $5 seems too cheap of a product. So you decided to go with the 6 or even the $7 because you perceive that that is the best value for your health, for example. So again, that has nothing to do with anchoring. It has to do with once you establish an anchor, you start to compare and contrast between those options that you're given. Now, you may think that the more options that you're given, the better. But in fact, this is all about the 3. That's in fact why I decided to title these slides. It's all about the 3. It is no secret that this has been done on purpose for quite some time, and that marketers and recently neuroscientists and psychologists have used this knowledge to alter your purchasing behavior. Marketers and now neuroscientists are hired to first get your attention. That is the most important thing. Obviously, they need to compete with other people who are doing the same thing. So when they're hired by companies, what they want is to get your attention first, and then to direct towards buying a particular product. So it's not only about getting your attention. Now that I get your attention, I need you to be buying these type of things. So obviously, I need some mechanisms that make that easier for you, that makes the decision easier for you. It all starts with the number 3. 3 is a magical number of options because it allows people to compare the option with the other 2, establishing the relative value of that option to the other 2, but it doesn't overwhelm people. There's also a finite number that is different for everyone. Some people might think, well, I would actually appreciate having more options. Obviously, that depends also about the things that you're talking about. If you go to a restaurant and you only have 3 options for meals, obviously that's not going to be enough. But in general, when we're talking about products within the same category, when we're talking about services within the same category, it's good to have a number of options, but it's also not good to have too many options because now people are having to make decisions. And remember that making decisions is very stressful. It can actually lead to not only stress, but to that understanding of what if I make a bad decision and I have to live with the consequences of that? What if I'm lost? What if I'm making a decision that is going to cost me in the future? Because of that, making that decision easier is paramount for every single marketer out there. So basically, we want to make things easier for the other people. We want to make easier for the person to make a decision. Now, why not more than 3? When you introduce a 4th or more option, our brain, as I was saying before, has a harder time comparing values, establishing priorities, etc. Therefore, 3 seems to be the magical number, and marketers know about this. That's why a lot of options you will see for most services and products comes in 3s, making one of them the most desirable one. It is sometimes called with different labels. You're going to see this named differently, like bronze membership or silver and gold memberships. Sometimes you see that as a basic, premium, and professional. Different labels, but the meaning is pretty much the same. Is again to make it more clear that there's a cheap version for the few who just want to pay a little bit and enjoy some of these product. For the very few who want to spend more money and just enjoy these other things, there are these other options. And in the middle, you have the one in which most people are going to be focused on, and that's the one that seems a better deal for most. However, these can change. Some companies actually like to emphasize a better deal at the top cap, meaning at the most expensive product that they sell, by making it more appealing and even cheaper in comparison with the other 2. Now, I know that everything that I have discussed so far, it kind of suggests that this has to do with pricing, but this is actually very important because it actually doesn't, the principles that I've discussed of anchoring and the principle of comparing one with one product with another one, it has to do way more than just price. In fact, this contrast principle that I was discussing before and anchoring is being used for many things, from politicians to convey certain ideologies, to certain companies to convey certain messages that are not necessarily related to selling anything, but the culture itself. Now, the principles behind the decoy effect affect more than just our perception about a product and a service and the prices attached to them. The anchoring and the contrast principle that I was discussing can be behind many decisions we make in our daily lives. Choosing a doctor, for example, is one common of these examples, or a plumber, the type of jobs and the salary that I should make. All of that is based on that idea of an anchoring price point or an anchoring idea of what is good or what is bad, and then compare or do the comparison with the other options that you have, and then based on those two, making a decision. Now, even those decisions that we make that affect other people. So it's not only about our own decisions on how to choose a doctor, choose a plumber, or any other service. Sometimes it's about making the decision that will affect other people. Like in the case of politicians, we choose ideas that we follow, groups that we choose for us and for our kids. Any of these decisions will be influenced by our points of reference, which is the anchoring that I was discussing before, and the relative contrast in comparison we established between that, meaning the anchoring point that we have of reference, in our options, meaning the contrast principle that I was discussing a minute ago. The hard part to accept is that in most cases, the options are presented to you in a way on purpose. There's no casual information that is presented to you, and then you make the decision. That is what companies successful in markets in particular have successfully done, is to create that illusion that you have the choice. But in reality, there's a lot of thought put behind those. And yes, you might think that you can choose, but in reality, those choices have been chosen for you. You're just given 3 choices or 4 choices, whatever it is that the services of a particular company that you enjoy are giving you. They made those decisions for you. You just happen to choose the one that you think is more convenient. But even that decision that you make, and you think that it was a conscious decision, sometimes that decision is already made for you. They made it so appealing and so easier for you to make the decision, but they know that most people are going to choose one thing. That doesn't mean that you're going to fall for that 100% of the time. Sometimes you choose a different thing, but they also count on that. They count that a few amount of people will choose differently. Now, someone or some people thought of this and had the purpose of making you or people like you behaving the way they wanted because it is beneficial to them, to their cause, that you behave that way. Now, the next thing that I wanted to talk about has to do with that idea of ideas and not necessarily about focusing about products, because I think that when we talk about the decoy effect, we focus too much on pricing and how to establish good products. And in fact, when you talk about the decoy effect, it's almost impossible to talk about it without mentioning those. But as I said, this is more than just pricing. It has to do a lot of with the principles behind and how that affects your decisions in general, that including ideas. In this case, I wanted to start by saying your idea is too radical. No worries. Just introduce another more radical idea and you're good to go. Now, there's a phrase in Spanish, and I'm going to say first in Spanish and I'm going to translate. And the phrase is, y otros vendrán y a mí bueno me harán, which means, and others will come and they will make me look good. The idea is very simple. If you think I'm bad, wait until another worse person comes and then we will talk. During the last year of Mr. Trump's presidency, some hosts of progressive media shows commented on how they would be glad to even talk and see George Bush back, and how even McCain looked a moderate person now. This effect is caused by how much ex-President Trump pushed the envelope in so many of the pressing issues that we were encountering. His take on some of the most pressing problems that we have of the country, his behavior that seems erratic, and what many people called unpresidential, made every other president in comparison, Republican or Democrat, seems different and closer to each other, meaning you could actually make you could make a case that you could put them all together in one basket, if you will, and President Trump will be completely in a different basket in its own category. This is not the only time in recent history that America has encountered a similar situation. And in fact, in 2009, following the elections of Barack Obama, the Tea Party movement resurfaced. This group, fiscally conservative, had an enormous influence on the Republican Party and had a major impact in the decisions and the politicians chosen inside the party. In that case, the party and the general political discourse moved more to the right. And in fact, I wanted to stop and communicate that or try to explain a little bit more about that idea of extremism. We're constantly redefining what is good and what is bad. And that actually depends on our perception of what others perceive or communicate as extreme in one way or the other one. So we're constantly shifting from one side to the other one. And in recent decades through social media, this has become more difficult to keep track because of what all the things that we have discussed in the past in other videos. Since you choose a tribe and you pretty much only see the things that your tribe posts or communicates with you, remember that even the algorithms pre-select certain information that you watch, creates that sense of normalcy. You have the sense that things are right here where you are at, that is normal. That is what normal is. And the others are not normal. They are the extreme people. And obviously, we have discussed that being a fallacy. That is actually not true. It's just that since now it's more difficult for you to contrast that information. Remember that we were talking a second ago about the principle of contrast, or the contrast principle. Since you don't have those points of reference that now serve you as a contrast for those ideas, it makes it harder because all you have is an anchoring point. That's it. No contrast anymore. You have your anchoring position, and within your points of reference, with those anchoring positions, with those points of reference that are your points of reference, you have some variability, but definitely not as variable if you compare to someone who thinks opposite to you, which again, you don't see, or you see them only very little or very few times. And then since you see them very few times in a light that is only making you think that they're the other extremists, you confirm that idea of, well, they're the extremist people because I only see them when my group is criticizing them. And since the majority of people that I am surrounded by say the same thing, that these people are extremists, why would I believe that there's anything else? That is literally the only information that I have. So again, as usual, social media has made it more difficult. And I would argue, obviously, the media in general has made it more difficult for us to have that contrast position that we so needed. So now the next slide is going to be about redefining the center. And it has to do with what I was just saying. Now, do you consider yourself a moderate person? Not political. I'm not saying that if you consider like right and left. I'm saying like in general, do you consider yourself as a moderate person? Chances are that you do consider yourself as a moderate person, that you base, or you think that you base everything that, or your decisions on logic and facts. You consider yourself a fair person and definitely not an extremist. Although you're concerned about how society and in general, your country in particular, has become more and more extreme. If that sounds familiar, you're not alone. In fact, most people think this way. Obviously, we cannot all be fair. We cannot all be center. We cannot all be moderate, and we cannot all be right at the same time. Someone has to be wrong. And unfortunately, this is going to be difficult to swallow. It's probably you most of the time, or sometimes. It doesn't have to be all the time, but you are wrong a lot of the time. So am I. So the same is for everyone else. Our perception of fairness or unfairness, same as the perception that we have of value, is constantly being evaluated and reevaluated. Everything will depend on our points of reference, the anchor that we were discussing before, and how we compare those to the situation being presented to us, the contrast principle. So again, same thing, same idea. An anchoring position that tells me what's right and what's wrong, what is a valuable thing, what is not valuable. And then we compare to those in a similar situations, and then we establish now, based on that anchoring position, we compare with the other ones that are similar. Now, if I hold a particular point of view about something I care about, and the majority of my group agrees with my idea, that is the anchoring view, right? Like you have a position. It could be about anything. It could be in politics. It could be about a religion. If you're surrounded by yourself by a group of people that agrees with you in one particular idea, then I can make an easy judgment, and I can compare, contrast that idea with what is being presented to me. Meaning, you present or throw an idea to me that is related to something that I already have thought through. And I have an anchoring position. I kind of have some people around me who have similar ideas. We contrast, I form my idea. And now I'm using that idea that I have to compare with the idea that you're throwing at me. So now the sense of what is valuable again and what is fair will be determined by the circumstances. If a new, more radical idea appears and that idea seems to be more in sync with the majority of my group, then I will adjust to that idea. And this is where I think the decoy effect for me is the most interesting. Forget about pricing. Think about the effect of that idea. Think about you made a decision based on something, and then someone introduces an idea, a new idea. And based on that alone, you change your mind. But you change your mind to a point in which you kind of contradicted the first impulse that you had. And that's within minutes. And sometimes, well, it takes some months or years, but you change your mind. Now, if a new more, I'm going to repeat that. If a new, more radical idea appears, and that idea seems to be more in sync with the majority of my group, in this case of your group, then you will adjust to that idea. So again, it's not that you thought about that idea in itself. It's just like you are trying to fit in with the group. This has to do with the in-group bias that we have discussed in the prior videos and the groupthink. But it also has to do on how that idea is appealing to you, because now you have established a new anchoring position. So now whatever is the center, it has changed, because now there's a new, more radical idea. So to give you a silly example, that is like having a super hot plate, a medium hot plate, and a cold plate. So the medium is more appealing because now, between the super hot and the kind of medium still hot and the cold, you would choose the medium still hot. You might have to wait. You cannot eat it right away, but that's the idea. However, if someone introduces a fourth plate, and now that plate is in between the medium hot and the super cold, you might actually choose that one. So again, that idea of what center was, or what perfect temperature in that example was, is now no longer the second plate that I presented, is now the third one. So I know that this is a silly example, but that happens all the time, especially with ideas, that once a new, more radical idea appears, now all of a sudden that idea of the center moves. And what the center is different, because now that idea pulled literally the center in comparison. So some of the things that you consider normal, now it seems, well, maybe that is a little bit more radical in the opposite extreme. Why? Because you just introduced a more radical idea on the other opposite side. Now, the other scene, or in this case, the other slide that I wanted to discuss has to do with that concept, and is related to what I just discussed. But I decided to title this Redefining Radicalism and Extremism. The worst part of all of this, or about all of it, is that your perception about your choices will not change. You still think that your choice is still center, moderate. You would justify it by saying that others are very radical and that you have always thought the same way, that you haven't moved, that they are the ones who have actually become more radical. The reality is that every time a new, more radical idea is introduced, the perception of what center means and therefore what radical is changes as well. Something we would consider extreme might not be such extreme if something more radical comes to place. This has dangerous consequences since the majority will adjust to what is considered or our new perception of what is considered the center or what is considered a fair. And new and more radical behaviors will be tolerated. We will not even see those radical anymore. We'll just get used to seeing more radical behaviors. The problem with that is that we used to think about that in just one line progression, meaning you introduce a radical idea on this side and then you push the center towards this side. And now, maybe a couple of years later, that same, the opposite group introduces a more radical idea and the center push back. And there's kind of a balance in between. And if you want to talk about politics, for example, that is representative for 4 years of, or 8 years of Democrats, 8 years of Republicans. And then there's a point in which the perception of the opposite group is that this group is pushing too much towards one side. They come into place. The first 4 years are a little bit more moderate. And as soon as they have the second term, they tend to push more towards the other side. And then there's a flip. And that's when it starts the other group more towards the center and pushing towards the other side. That is kind of like a more natural cycle, although I'm not saying that it's necessarily a good or bad thing. It's just the way that it happened. The problem with nowadays is that we tend to use radical ideas and introduce those radical ideas in both sides. And we're not even aware of that. Especially if you're part of a particular group, or if you perceive yourself on one side or the other one, you might think, well, but look at what this other group is doing. It's so radical. So what I'm doing in comparison is nothing. Not realizing that for you, that is true, but the perception of the opposite group that is on the other extreme is that you are the radical one, and that you're introducing or condoning, certain behaviors that for them are unacceptable. They're radical. They're dangerous. So the problem with that is, as I said before, since we are so caught up into our groups, into our groupthinks, we no longer feel the need to be pushed because we're pushing the center towards what we perceive our side to be. I know that this is a difficult concept, but basically, and this is the best way that I can illustrate, it's as if there's no longer one center in the middle between two extremes. It's as if we have decided that we're not going to move from our positions. We're going to stay here. And there are literally two centers on each side. One center, on each side, which means that we will have two centers in general, one center here and one center here. But if the center was here in the middle, in comparison, you can see how this center is actually not a center. It's on one side already. And sometimes even an extremist center. So as you can see, that idea of radicalism and extremism is very difficult to follow when I perceive that the majority of group that I know is on this side, and for me the center is this, and no longer what the center used to be, which is the idea between the opposition and my ideas. Now, possible solutions, as I always finish with this actually shouldn't be difficult. This is actually one of the dumbest things that you can give as I'm actually kind of like ashamed to have, not ashamed, like feel embarrassed that I have to actually just offer that, because I don't even think that this is useful because it's so simple. The problem is that it's so simple but so difficult to actually do. And the first thing is just don't make a rash decision ever. So when confronted with options, always be prepared with what you want and need first. So think about that in isolation. Don't let anybody to introduce any more ideas. Have a clear understanding of what is good for you and what is good for other people as well. But have a clear idea before you're presented with options. If you're in a situation where you went with a clear idea of what to purchase, for example, if we're talking about buying, again, if you're going for the monetary part of the decoy effect, or the type of services you wanted and ended up purchasing something different. Again, if you came with one idea and you went out with something different, you went to buy a car and you had a clear idea, and then you get out of the place and then you have a different car and you're thinking, how did that even happen? Then that is a red flag. The same can be said about ideas and ideologies you have subscribed to that were antithetical to what you used to believe. Always come from that understanding first. Every time you're introduced a new idea, make sure that that is actually in sync with what you believe first. And obviously, it's good for you to contrast with other people. In fact, that's what I was saying that is also dangerous about this tribalism, that actually makes it harder for you to look for other ideas. And I also want to say, don't get me wrong, everyone changes their minds. That is normal and healthy. However, there needs to be a clear reasons as to why we change our minds. And it needs to be, again, in sync with our values and, if possible, with logic. And I always like to say that it's not only or, it is not with values or logic, it's and with logic. Because unfortunately, we think, well, it is in sync with my values. It's like, well, but if it's not logical, if it's something that is completely biased, then obviously it's not good, even if that is in sync with your values. Maybe it's a time for you to reevaluate certain values. Now, thinking about the things that you want and need in advance and the reasons behind them, meaning, why do I really need this? Why would I subscribe with that idea? What is that this person is trying to tell me? What are the ulterior motives that this person or this group has? Is always useful, and it helps you navigate your decisions much, much easier. An extra step would be to question our decisions before we even make them. So once you have that clear, again, I'm not rushing and then questioning certain things, you also could question, why are you going to even make that decision? Why do we choose a particular service or product? Why is this beneficial for you? What is the reason why you think it's beneficial for you? What do we need this exactly for? What good is this going to bring to you or to your life or to your family? So all of these questions can help you navigate throughout all these process of decision or decision making. But more importantly, again, keep in mind that yes, there needs to be flexibility. You need to have the capacity to reevaluate your decisions, and then you can change your mind. That is not only good, but it's desirable at some point, but not to the point that you are convinced about certain things and a salesperson can convince you of something else. That's where the danger comes from. So as usual, I hope that this information is useful. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that this brings some value to you. Thank you again, and I see you in the next video. Thank you.